There are stories whispered across barracks, aircraft hangars, and dimly lit command rooms. Stories that never appear in official reports, never get stamped into history books, and never find their way into documentaries. Not because they lack importance, but because they are sacred. These stories travel differently, not through ink or television screens, but through memory, through brotherhood, through the quiet conversations soldiers only share with those who understand what war demands. This is one of those stories, because somewhere between blistering deserts, dense jungles thick with rain, and forgotten war zones carved into mountains and mud, a belief began to spread. It didn't start as a slogan. It wasn't taught during training. No general announced it. It emerged from experience, from missions that should have failed, from nights when fear sat heavy in every chest, from moments where survival felt impossible, until someone in the unit stepped forward, a Filipino. And over time, among soldiers from the United States, Australia, Canada, Europe, and beyond, a quiet phrase began to circulate. If there's a Filipino in your team, you're not alone. Some speak those words the way someone speaks of luck, as if Filipinos carry a charm woven from resilience or fate. Others repeat it like a rule, steady, proven, unquestioned. But those who have stood shoulder to shoulder with a Filipino soldier, the ones who have heard him laugh in the middle of chaos, who have seen him work even when exhausted, who have watched him move toward danger when everyone else hesitated. They don't say it casually. They say it the way a survivor speaks, the way someone speaks about something, or someone, who changed everything. To them, it isn't superstition. It isn't optimism. It is truth. A truth earned not in classrooms or simulations, but in the dust of real battle, in the echo of real gunfire, in the weight of real sacrifice. Because when the world grows loud with fear, when uncertainty suffocates a mission, when every second feels like a final one, a Filipino doesn't just stand beside you, he anchors you, not with size, not with rank, not with intimidation, but with calm, with faith, with a kind of courage that seems almost unshakable because it comes from somewhere most people never learn to build from. And that is why the belief remains. Quiet, steady, unquestioned. A belief carried not by speeches, but by the men who lived to tell the story. The American commander who later shared this story was not a man easily moved. Years in special operations had stripped away sentiment, comfort, and illusion. He had seen every type of soldier, the physically unmatched, the technically brilliant, the fearless, the reckless, the disciplined, and the unbreakable. Experience had hardened him into someone who measured men not by their rank or reputation, but by how they behaved when everything fell apart. So when he first deployed with a Filipino soldier on his team, he didn't expect anything unusual. No rumors, no reputation, no hype. Just another name on a roster. At least that's what he believed at first, because the Filipino didn't stand out through loud confidence or obvious dominance. He wasn't the biggest man in the squad. He didn't bark instructions or demand respect. He didn't posture or brag. Instead, what caught the commander off guard was something far quieter. So subtle that most would overlook it if they weren't paying attention. A quiet readiness, not nervous, not overly eager, just prepared, as if he had already accepted whatever the mission would demand. A grounded calm, the kind that doesn't waver, even under pressure. A stillness that suggested he had already made peace with sacrifice long before he wore the uniform. And then there was the presence, unspoken, steady, unmistakable. The commander later described it this way. Some soldiers walk into a room and try to take command of it. A Filipino walks in and somehow becomes the anchor of it. While the rest of the unit checked their scopes, adjusted their helmets, double-checked ammunition, sharpened blades, and rehearsed procedures. The Filipino did all of that too. But he did something more. He checked on people. No rank, no protocol, just instinct. Hydration check. You warm enough? Need me to tighten that strap? You got someone back home waiting. Keep that in your head. He asked questions others never asked, not because it was his job, but because to him, a mission wasn't just about objectives and execution, it was about the lives walking beside him. To others, soldiers were roles, specialists, skill sets. To him, they were brothers. And the commander noticed something extraordinary. Men who had just met this Filipino, hardened veterans, aggressive rookies, stoic leaders, responded to him differently. Walls came down, tension eased, breathing steadied. Because his presence didn't pressure, it reassured. He didn't need authority to be trusted. He didn't need volume to be heard. He didn't need rank to lead. His leadership wasn't forced, it was felt. And slowly, without ceremony or announcement, the commander realized something. This wasn't just another soldier. This was the kind of man you hope is next to you when the world turns violent and uncertain. Not because he's the strongest, but because he understands something most people forget. A team is not built from skill alone. A team becomes unbreakable when every person knows. Somebody cares whether they live or die. And for the Filipino soldier, that wasn't a military principle. That was who he was. That was how he fought. That was how he belonged. The American commander who would later tell this story was not the kind of man easily impressed. Years of elite deployments had carved him into someone who measured people differently than most. Medals didn't sway him, rank didn't intimidate him, and tough talk meant nothing once bullets started flying. He had fought beside some of the world's most capable operators, men trained to survive the impossible, men whose reputations echoed across continents. Strength? He had seen plenty. Speed? Common in his world. Flawless discipline and elite training. Standard, not special. So the idea of someone surprising him felt almost laughable. And yet, the first Filipino he ever deployed with did exactly that. Not by being louder, not by being faster, not by dominating the room, but through something quieter, something far easier to miss unless you understood what truly mattered in combat. It was the way the Filipino carried himself, not tense, not arrogant, not overly relaxed, just ready, as if he'd already made peace with whatever the day demanded. There was a calmness in him, a steady stillness, the kind that doesn't come from confidence alone, but from acceptance, purpose, and something deeper than skill. And the commander noticed something else. This Filipino didn't try to earn respect. He simply behaved in a way that made respect the only natural response. While the rest of the team ran final weapon checks, reviewed maps, and rehearsed contingencies with furrowed brows and heavy adrenaline, the Filipino moved differently. He checked his gear, yes, but then he checked on people. Not dramatically, not intrusively, just naturally, like breathing. Water levels okay? Anyone missing something? You need help tightening that strap. You got rest? If not, switch with me. He wasn't monitoring equipment, he was watching morale. He wasn't tracking assignments, he was tracking exhaustion. He wasn't just preparing for a mission, he was preparing the people who would fight beside him. And the commander realized something rare. Most soldiers train to fight. Some train to lead. But a Filipino, he fights to protect, and he leads by serving. Not because it's required, not because someone ordered it, but because deep down he believes a truth many forget. A team is not built from uniforms or ranks. A team becomes unbreakable when every person feels valued, seen, and protected. To him, these weren't just colleagues. These weren't bodies filling formation. These weren't strangers with matching gear. They were brothers. A family, forged not by blood, but by responsibility. That was the difference. That was the presence the commander felt. A strength without ego, a confidence without noise, a loyalty without condition. And in that moment, before the mission even began, the commander understood something that would follow him for the rest of his career. Some soldiers make you feel prepared. A Filipino makes you feel safe. Trust isn't built in the loud moments. It doesn't come from speeches, orders, or titles. It isn't earned in victory celebrations or after-action reports. It grows quietly, in the unnoticed spaces between chaos and calm. It grows in the soldier who volunteers for the task everyone else avoids, not for recognition, not for approval, but because someone has to do it, and he refuses to watch another carry the weight alone. It grows in the Filipino who cracks a joke when the air is thick with dread, not because he doesn't feel fear, but because he refuses to let fear control the room. It grows in the man who stays awake during rest rotation, eyes burning with exhaustion, but still alert, not because he's invincible, but because someone else finally found sleep. And he values that more than his own comfort. Trust grows when no one is watching. In the small, almost invisible gestures, sharing the last sip of water, fixing someone's gear without mentioning it, asking a teammate about the family waiting back home, and actually listening. These moments are not dramatic. No medals follow them. No flags wave for them. Yet these are the moments that reveal the truth of a man's character. Because in the harshest corners of the world, where maps end, radios fail, and fear breathes down the neck of every soldier, actions speak louder than promises. And again, the Filipino shows something different. He doesn't serve because of orders. He doesn't push forward because someone is watching. He doesn't carry more because he must prove something. He does it because service lives in him, long before the uniform ever did. Some men fight because they were trained to, some because they were told to. But a Filipino? He fights because loyalty, sacrifice, and brotherhood have been part of him since before he entered the battlefield. It's in the way he respects elders, in the way he protects friends, in the way family isn't a word, it's a commitment. So when he stands beside you, when the world grows uncertain and the mission turns dark, you don't just feel supported, you feel defended, not by a soldier who is merely doing his job, but by someone who has already decided, if I am here beside you, you will not fall alone. And that is why trust grows, silently, steadily, until one day, without realizing it, you look at the Filipino beside you and understand, this isn't just someone on your team. This is the person you hope is there when everything else begins to fall apart. Trust isn't built in the loud moments. It isn't formed during ceremonies or in front of saluting officers. It doesn't grow during speeches, briefings, or training drills. It grows in the quiet, in the spaces where no one expects recognition and no one is keeping score. It grows in silence, in the Filipino soldier who volunteers for the hardest job, the job everyone silently hopes someone else will take. He steps forward not because he wants praise, but because he cannot stand the thought of someone weaker carrying the burden alone. Trust grows in the one who cracks a joke when fear hangs heavy in the air, not because he finds war amusing, but because laughter reminds everyone they are still human in a place trying to turn them into ghosts. It grows in the man who stays awake during rest rotations, eyes red, body aching, heartbeat slow with exhaustion, but still alert. He pretends he isn't tired, pretends he isn't running on fumes, pretends he didn't notice that someone finally fell asleep beside him and desperately needed the rest. No spotlight shines on these choices. No applause follows them. No medals are pinned to celebrate them. These are not dramatic acts, but they are proof, soft, consistent proof, of who he is when no one is watching. They're reminders of something rare. Some men serve because it's their duty, because the uniform demands obedience, because orders must be followed, But a Filipino serves differently. He serves because service sits in his bones, because loyalty wasn't learned, it was inherited, because sacrifice isn't a requirement, it's an instinct. To him, being part of a unit is not a contract, it's a promise that says, as long as I am here, you will never face the darkness alone. And so trust grows, quietly, steadily, until one day you realize that the man standing beside you is not just another soldier in formation. He is the one you will follow into the unknown, the one whose footsteps you trust more than any map, the one you hope is still beside you when the world turns violent and uncertain. Because some soldiers are dependable. But a Filipino? He is unforgettable. Every soldier eventually reaches a moment where training collides with reality, where plans dissolve and survival becomes the only language left. For this commander, that moment came without warning. It happened deep inside a hostile region, the kind of place where even the wind felt like a warning. Nothing about the environment offered comfort. The mountains were jagged and unforgiving. The air hung heavy with heat and silence. And the narrow pathways felt less like trails, and more like traps carved by time. The map in their hands promised direction, but offered no mercy. There were no shortcuts, no alternate routes, no safe fallbacks, only forward. At first, everything seemed routine, measured steps, synchronized movement, steady breath. But then the subtle signals began. Communication faltered, radios crackled with fragments instead of full sentences. Visibility shrank, shadows stretched unnaturally, and dust blurred the horizon like an unfinished painting. The silence grew too perfect, not peaceful, but staged, the kind of silence that soldiers learn to fear. The commander felt it before anyone said a word, that cold instinct in the spine that whispers, "Something is wrong." Eyes scanned ridges, hands tightened around triggers. Breathing slowed, because everyone knew what came next. And then, like a dam bursting, chaos arrived. Gunfire split the air, sharp, sudden, merciless. Explosions tore through the ground, rattling bones and swallowing commands before they could be spoken. Dust rose thick and violent, turning men into silhouettes and the battlefield into confusion. The world shrank to seconds, and every second demanded a decision. The formation broke. Cover vanished. The plan, whatever it once was, no longer mattered. There was no strategy now, no rank, no structure, only instinct, only reflex, only survival. And in the storm of noise and fear, as the battlefield twisted into chaos, the commander saw something he would never forget. Not the fear, not the violence, but the Filipino soldier beside him, steady, focused, unshaken. While others fought to process what was happening, he was already moving. Not away from danger, but toward it. Not recklessly, not blindly, but with a certainty that could only come from a heart that had already decided, if someone must take the risk, let it be me. And in that moment, amid fire, confusion, and collapsing order, the commander understood something clearly. This mission would change him, not because of defeat or victory, but because of the man standing beside him. The commander took a step toward cover, instincts guiding him more than thought. But instinct wasn't fast enough. There, half buried beneath loose earth and debris, sat a threat disguised as nothing. Wires thin as veins, triggers sensitive enough to react to a breath, explosives waiting with silent patience. A trap meant not just to kill, but to erase. He didn't see it, not until it was too late. His boot hovered inches above the pressure point, and time seemed to fracture into stillness. His breath stopped. His heartbeat thundered. His mind registered the truth. One wrong shift, and everything ends. He froze. Not out of weakness, but because movement meant death. The world around him erupted with gunfire and chaos. Yet in that suspended second, everything felt strangely quiet, like the universe itself was holding its breath. Before fear could turn into action, before logic could process survival, someone else moved. The Filipino soldier beside him caught the danger instantly. There was no panic in his eyes, no hesitation in his body, no moment spent calculating risk, just instinct, just duty, just heart. He lunged forward, grabbed the commander with both arms, and yanked him away from the kill zone with a force that came not from strength alone, but from urgency, loyalty, and conviction. The commander stumbled backward, falling hard against rock and dust, and before he could regain balance, before he could speak, before he could warn or protest, the Filipino had already made his choice. He moved into the blast radius, not by accident, not by misjudgment, but deliberately, placing himself where death waited. He positioned his body as a shield, not for glory, not for recognition, but for someone he had decided was worth saving. And in that final second, just before the world exploded, his expression wasn't fear. It was peace. Then the device detonated. Fire, shockwave, shrapnel slicing the air like glass. The ground trembled with violent force. Dust swallowed everything. Sound shattered into ringing silence. And when the chaos settled, when the smoke thinned and the battlefield slowly returned into focus, the truth became painfully clear. This wasn't impulse. This wasn't luck. This wasn't accident. It was a decision, a final, irreversible act that spoke louder than any medal, any oath, any military creed. A decision that said, not today, not him, not while I still have breath, not while I can stand, not while I can choose. Because for him, brotherhood wasn't a word, it was a promise. And he kept it. Dust settled. Echoes faded. And for the first time since chaos erupted, everything became still. Not peaceful stillness, but the kind that feels heavy, unnatural, wrong. The kind of silence that doesn't comfort. It punishes. The commander blinked through the haze, ears ringing, vision blurred, lungs burning from debris. He lifted his head slowly, disoriented, trying to make sense of what remained of the battlefield. He was alive, not because of training, not because of chance, but because someone else had made a choice in a fraction of a second. A choice that cost him everything. Just inches away, the Filipino lay motionless. Armor torn, uniform scorched, body broken. Yet posture still protective. As if even in injury, he refused to let harm reach the man he had shielded. The commander crawled toward him, not with strength, but with desperation. His hands shook, his breath trembled. He gently lifted the Filipino's head, supporting it with both hands, as if afraid a stronger grip would break something sacred. And then, the soldier's eyes opened, not wide, not frantic, just enough. Enough to show awareness, enough to show recognition, enough to show that he knew exactly what he'd done. And he had no regrets. His breathing was shallow, his voice barely existed. Yet there was no fear, no panic, only acceptance. A strange, quiet peace, as if he had already made peace with his purpose long before this moment arrived. The commander's voice cracked, raw, broken, unfiltered. Why? It wasn't a question of tactics. It wasn't about orders or logic. It was a human question from a man who could not fathom why someone would give everything so willingly. The Filipino looked at him, the same softly confident expression he'd worn since the first day they met, the same warmth, the same calm. And with a fading breath, he answered with a faint smile, a smile that held no fear, no regret, only loyalty. Because you're my brother. Not teammate, not commander, not comrade, brother. A word that carries weight in Filipino culture. A word that means I will protect you, even if it costs me everything." And in that final moment, the commander realized something he would never forget. Some soldiers fight because they are ordered to. But a Filipino fights because love, loyalty, and sacrifice are written into him long before war ever tries to test it. Awards were given. Reports were written. Missions continued because war doesn't pause for grief, not even for heroes. But the commander changed. Something in him had shifted, quietly, permanently, like a fault line beneath the earth that moves once and never returns to its original shape. He found himself replaying moments he once dismissed as small: the shared water, the quiet humor, the willingness to carry more weight than anyone asked him to, the instinct to put others first, every time. He began to understand something many soldiers forget along the way. A great warrior isn't defined by the weapon he carries, the muscle he builds, or the medals pinned to his chest. A great warrior is defined by the heart he brings into battle, by the values he refuses to compromise, by the humanity he protects even when surrounded by destruction. And that realization changed everything. So when he was later asked, during a leadership briefing, what mattered most in choosing the men he wanted beside him on a mission, everyone in the room expected the usual answer: skill, discipline, physical ability, precision. But he didn't mention any of those. He didn't talk about marksmanship, endurance, training hours, or tactical genius. Instead, he paused, long enough for everyone to realize the answer wasn't coming from his mind. It was coming from somewhere deeper. Then he said, with a voice steady and unmistakably honest, "I choose the man with heart." A murmur passed through the room, confusion mixed with curiosity. So he continued, "Skill can be trained, strength can be built, fear can be controlled, but heart, real, unwavering heart, comes from a place no instructor can teach." He let the words sit in the silence. Some understood instantly, others needed time. Then, almost as if speaking to himself more than the room, he added the line that would follow him for the rest of his career: "Give me a Filipino beside me, and I will walk into anything." No bravado, no exaggeration, just truth, earned through blood, sacrifice, and brotherhood. Because in his eyes, and in the memories he carried, a Filipino wasn't just a soldier, he was the difference between going to war and making it home. This story isn't about borders, uniforms, or medals. It isn't about nation against nation or flag against flag. It isn't about whose army is stronger or who writes history books. This story is about something far more human. It's about loyalty that doesn't falter, even when fear is screaming. Courage that doesn't hesitate, even when logic says run. And a brotherhood that doesn't end, even when the battlefield goes silent. It's about the kind of man who doesn't measure his worth by rank, but by responsibility. A man who doesn't ask, "What do I gain?" but instead asks, "Who still needs me?" Because somewhere, in deserts scorched by heat, in jungles thick with humidity, in mountains carved by war, this truth has been witnessed again and again. And every soldier who has ever fought beside a Filipino carries that truth with them. Maybe they don't speak it often. Maybe they don't put it into formal reports. Maybe it never reaches headlines. But deep down, beneath the armor, beneath the training, beneath the hardened exterior required to survive war, they know, because they saw it with their own eyes. They felt it when someone stood between them and danger. They heard it in the laughter that cut through fear. They trusted it when everything else around them fell apart. Filipinos don't just fight with skill. They fight with heart, with faith, with a spirit shaped by sacrifice, shaped by culture, shaped by generations who learned that strength isn't proven by how loudly you stand, but by how fiercely you protect the people beside you, and that unshakable truth is what sets them apart. Because when a Filipino goes to war, he isn't just fighting for mission or command. He is fighting for the man beside him. He is fighting for family, even when that family isn't blood. And for those who have served beside one, that changes everything.